You're welcome back to Nationwide and to Moyglass in County Tipperary, where we're rediscovering the connections between this part of Ireland and Australia's folk hero Ned Kelly. Now, there's been a bit of controversy in Australia recently about his recently discovered remains. You see, a skeleton was discovered in 2009 and DNA tests have confirmed that these are in fact the remains of Ned Kelly. So now, more than 130 years after he was hanged, he will be laid to rest in a family plot. Michael Delahaye in Victoria in Australia brings us now the story of the life, death and final resting place of Ned Kelly.
He was a bank robber and a cop killer. But what made Ned Kelly larger than life was that he was also a rebel.
But what he did was truly of legendary stature. He attempted to take on the British Empire. He challenged the authority of Queen Victoria.
Hughes Creek, Avenel, Victoria, the scene of the first recorded episode in the short but eventful life of Edward Ned Kelly. Ned was about 10 when he jumped into the swollen waters to save a local lad, Dick Shelton. The boy's father presented him with what would become the most revered relic of the Kelly legend, now enshrined at the Benalla Costume and Pioneer Museum, a green silk sash. Ned so valued the sash that he wore it the day of his last stand. It still bears his blood, Irish blood. The blood of his Tipperary-born father, John, transported to Australia for stealing pigs, and his formidable mother, Ellen, brought out by her family from County Antrim.
He was very, very Irish. His parents were Irish, his aunts and uncles were Irish, his cousins were first-generation Australians. They all spoke with a brogue, a broader brogue from the parents, a softer brogue from the children.
Ian Jones is the widely acknowledged authority on the Kellys. In 1980, he and his wife, the late Bronwyn Binns, made a television series that charted the Kellys' criminal career.
I have a check here from Mr. McCauley at Faithful's Creek. He was sure you could help me. Very well, sir. How would you like it, sir? I'll take whatever you've got. Bail up.
Over nearly 2 years, the Kelly gang ranged freely across northern Victoria and beyond, holding up banks and taking whole communities hostage. But despite ever bigger offers of reward, the local police and the colonial authorities in Melbourne seemed powerless. Because this was Kelly country. Not only did the gang know every gully and every creek, but they could count on an army of local sympathisers for food, shelter, protection and silence. The pivotal incident which had transformed Kelly from a minor horse thief to a major villain, and ultimately to the gallows, took place in a leafy clearing called Stringy Bark Creek. Ned, his brother Dan and 2 others close in on a police posse sent out to capture and possibly kill them. In the ensuing shootout, it's Kelly and his men who do the killing. Three policemen die, Kennedy, Scanlon, Lonigan, all Irish-born. It's a turning point. Kelly, already on the run, is outlawed. His response? To reinvent himself as a guerrilla revolutionary.
It's when the police turned against the Kelly supporters, when they locked them up without trial, and then eventually tried to deny them the right to buy land in the Kelly country. At that point, Ned Kelly saw himself as responsible for what was happening to them, and that is when the rebellion truly began.
A rebellion with echoes of Ireland. In a manifesto known as the Jerilderie Letter, Kelly evokes the Irish people's centuries-old struggle to rise old Erin's Isle once more from the pressure and tyrannism of the English yoke. Kelly declares war. With Northeast Victoria the battleground, it's to be the Kelly Gang and their supporters, Catholic and Protestant, against the police and the authorities. The objective, though geographically vague, was, Ian Jones believes, a breakaway republic.
It started off as a fantasy, simply an idea of freedom from English rule. But at exactly the same time, the Boers in South Africa were fighting for freedom from English rule, and they were using their farm horses, their own rifles, and they did a fantastic job, and in fact, in that initial Boer War, succeeded. Now, the Kellys were capable of the same thing.
The Kellys certainly knew the terrain better than their enemy, but that alone wasn't enough. In the autumn of 1880, there was a curious spate of thefts. A number of local farmers reported that somebody was stealing part of their ploughs. This part, the so-called mouldboard, the steel blade that turns the soil. In a clandestine forge, the gang beat the stolen plough parts into armour. Glenrowan, the site of what was to be a famous victory. Kelly had lured the police here in force, intending to derail their train with multiple casualties. But the sabotage failed. The Battle of Glenrowan became Kelly's last stand. Instead of leading the attack, the gang found themselves under siege with hostages in a flimsy inn on what is now an empty paddock.
The outlaws came out to the front of the inn and they fanned out in their suits of armour as the police unloaded their horses from the railway station over here.
Paul Terry is the author of a book based on recent excavations of the site.
There were more than 40 men, women and children holed up in this tiny little wooden building, ducking for cover, trying to find whatever cover they could from the bullets that were just punching through the weatherboard walls.
The outcome is inevitable, but rather than flee, Kelly confronts his enemies head-on.
The police and the civilians see him coming through the early morning mist in this suit of armour, and they thought it was a monster, a bunyip, an Aboriginal monster. They couldn't understand what this strange, tall, clanking creature was.
Come on, lads! We'll whip the lot of them!
Eventually, one of the policemen, a character called Sergeant Steele, he fired at Ned's exposed legs with his shotgun, and Ned had been wounded many times already. He was carrying something like 28 wounds by the end of it. Eventually, that brought him crashing to the ground. He was captured, and that was the end of Ned Kelly's last stand.
4 months later, Kelly faces trial for the murder of Constable Lonergan at Stringybar Creek. He's found guilty and sentenced. Just 25 years old, he's hanged in Melbourne jail. But the end of one story is the beginning of another. What happened to Kelly's remains? We know what Kelly wanted because he's told us. This is one of his death masks here at the Burke Museum in Beechworth. The day before his execution, he dictated a letter to his jailer addressed to the prison governor. And in the very last sentence, he specifically asks that you grant permission for my friends to have my body, that they might bury it in consecrated ground. It wasn't to be. After being buried in Melbourne jail, Kelly's remains were reburied in the 1920s in the grounds of Pentridge Prison, along with those of other hanged men. And it was here in 2009 that archaeologists uncovered a mass grave of coffins and boxes. In one of the boxes, originally used for axe handles, they found what were thought to be Kelly's remains. Victoria's Institute of Forensic Medicine, the VIFM, set to work, and in September 2011 announced that DNA tests had verified the skeleton as Kelly's. Bullets from the last stand still lodged in his bones. Quite separately, a skull, which for decades had been claimed, even named, to be Kelly's, was proved also by DNA not to be. But who now owned Kelly's verified skeleton? The site of the old Pentridge prison had been sold off to be transformed into an urban village. The developer argued that by law the bones should be put back to become part of a museum or memorial. Not so, said Kelly's descendants. Among them, Lee Olver, Ned's great-grandnephew who'd provided the crucial DNA. They should be buried, as Ned wished, in consecrated ground. After a very public tug of bones, the issue was decided by Victoria's Attorney General Robert Clark in favour of the family. Greta Cemetery, North Victoria, Kelly's final resting place. It's doubly appropriate. Greta was where Ned grew up, and both his mother Ellen and brother Dan are buried here.
In their last meeting, Ned's mother said to him, "I mind you'll die like a Kelly son, as bravely as you lived." That he did.
This weekend, 133 years later, he's coming home. Back to a part of Victoria, known today as Kelly Country.
At last, Ned can hopefully rest in peace.